Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This year marks a significant milestone in Canadian history, the 150th anniversary of the Royal Military College of Canada. Founded in 1876, RMC has played a central role in educating generations of military leaders, adapting to global conflict, technological change, and evolving expectations of service, leadership, and learning. My guest today is Alexander Landry, a graduate of the college who spent a decade serving in the regular force before transitioning to the reserves, and who remains deeply connected to RMC through alumni engagement and the planning of this anniversary year. In this conversation, we'll look at RMC through both a personal lens and a historical one, from first impressions as a cadet to life after graduation, to how an institution with 150 years of tradition continues to adapt to a rapidly changing world. Here's my conversation with Alexander Landry. Alex, welcome back to the program, and thanks for joining us, and particularly for being part of this milestone year for the Royal Military College.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on. Glad to be back in Kingston specifically today to have this conversation, and of course, 150th anniversary of RMC coming up, so glad to be chatting about that with you, Dave.
Take us back to your very first day as a cadet at RMC. When you think about that day, what is the most vivid memory you have?
For me, easily the most vivid memory for the entrance to the college was marching through the arch. So all first-year cadets, prior to starting their first-year orientation period, will march under the arch into the college. That was a big memory that I'd been looking forward to, coming out of high school. However, I would say the more vivid memories, and those that are deeply ingrained in my mind now, are those of afterwards grabbing my equipment and whatnot and being quickly shuffled off into the hallways and the rooms to start the first year orientation period, which would make up the next 6 weeks of my life.
Now, before we go any further, I guess we should talk about Royal Military College for those folks who may not live in Canada or may not know too much about the military. What is the Royal Military College?
So the Royal Military College of Canada is an institution essentially that is Canada's premier military university. So what they do is they offer subsidized training and education specifically to entrance into the Canadian Armed Forces. So people will come in under the regular officer training plan, be provided education and leave with an undergraduate degree, but then enter the ranks of the Canadian Armed Forces as qualified officers going into various trades.
Now, the college got started back in 1876. How many students were enrolled at that particular year?
Yeah, so we call it the old 18, and I'd be bad if I didn't actually be able to tell that we had 18 at that time. There was a time for first years when you're coming into the orientation period where you actually need to know all 18 names of those first cadets, but I would be remiss to say I still do those today.
They have been ingrained in your mind.
This is correct.
How many students are there now?
Usually, I think it's about 1,000 if I'm not mistaken, and there's a current work under the Canadian Military College Review Board to actually expand that over time, especially as part of the retention and recruitment plans for the Canadian Armed Forces. But a graduating class is going to be anywhere between 175 and 250 if I'm not mistaken.
So when you talk about an enrollment of 1,000 students, physically, do they have the space to accommodate more than that if they're going to build?
So I know they're looking at specific plans right now on what the expansion of the accommodation situation is going to look like. And of course, we have the Collège Militaire Royal Saint-Jean, which is also in Saint-Jean. We've looked at other potential programs or ways of expanding the regular officer training plan. It's just going to be a question of those decisions being made in the coming years. But right now, relatively comfortably, I would say, the cadets are situated on the campus at about the 1,000 range.
So in first year, they all have to stay on the campus?
This is correct.
Okay. What originally drew you to RMC?
So there's a familial history for me. So my father was a graduate of the class of 1987, and towards grade 6, I would say, we actually moved to Kingston, and every September my dad would take my brother and I to the obstacle course towards the end of September to see the first years complete their orientation period and join the cadet wing. So from there, just going through high school, I knew it was something I always wanted to do. My brother would also go on to be a student there as well as a graduate. So now that makes 3 of us actually in the family that have graduated from the college.
So it's a family business, as it were.
I would say so. It was a good play on my dad's part to come and get us moved to Kingston right around the time I was starting to pick my universities.
My understanding is that when cadets come to RMC, they focus on academics during the fall and winter, and then in the spring and summer they do actual military training, correct?
That's correct. So the summers are generally predicated on completing military training specific to their trade. So it might be for the Navy, their initial naval training. For the Army, it's their basic military officer land qualifications, usually in Gagetown or Valcartier. Throughout the year, though, there is still the military flavor delivered on a weekly basis, be it through drill and instruction, doing professional military training, which was usually on Wednesday mornings from 8 to 10 for myself, as well as duty weekends, where there'd be opportunities to go shoot on the range or do visits with various units around Kingston and the Ontario area.
Now, before you actually started at RMC, would you have done some training before that?
So yes, I did 6 weeks actually in Saint Jean, so at the MEGA, the Canadian Forces Leadership Recruit School. So we showed up to RMC about mid-August in 2012, it would have been, and we got our ID pictures taken, did 2 days on campus, and from there we got onto buses and headed up to Saint Jean-sur-Richelieu, and we did about 6 weeks at what we call the MEGA. And once that was completed, we took the buses back down, saw family for about 40 minutes, marched through the arch, and then began our orientation period. So it was the 6 weeks warm-up to the actual difficult 6 weeks before the obstacle course.
So that routine is similar for everybody who enrolls at
The
RMC.
routine has changed over the past few years, and I'm not sure if that is still what they do, but there are orientation periods generically before the college intake, which allows some sort of military basis before they arrive for that orientation period.
So you spend 4 years at RMC, and then you graduate, and you eventually get posted. So where would you have been posted, and what would you have done as a member of the regular armed forces?
So as myself, as an engineering officer, I had completed my initial engineer training in the summer of my 3rd to 4th year because I already had second language training complete, considering bilingualism usually is one of the summers that students will do if they don't have a second language profile in the public service. So having completed that, I went and worked as a course officer in Gagetown at the Canadian Forces School of Military Engineering for 1 summer, and then took my full year of what we call Phase 4, my secondary engineer training. From there, I was subsequently posted to Petawawa as an engineer trooper platoon commander.
So what kind of engineering would you be doing?
Yeah, so for us, it was specifically looking at things like demolitions, bridge building, but then also road works and close support to infantry or other combat arms as engineers.
All of that is hands-on.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so you're in Petawawa. Where do you go from there?
From Petawawa, I then returned actually to the engineer school in Gagetown, New Brunswick from 2019 to 2021, and then spent 3 years overseas in Izmir, Turkey, working for NATO as a secondment.
And what would that involve?
So my role actually when I was at NATO was more in a planning and strategic and operational role. So I was the coordination staff officer for the chief land engineer of all of NATO's forces at NATO Allied Land Command. So it was a lot of just schedule synchronization, coordination, and working with the various different forces across NATO in the area of responsibility. So across Europe with a couple of operations in places like Iraq at the time, the end of Afghanistan, and different areas like that.
Now, when we watch the news and we hear stories about military and about NATO forces working together and other countries that get involved with NATO forces, how difficult is it for that coming together, to work together? Are the forces laid out pretty similar to each other?
So yes and no. Evidently, NATO has brought on some countries more from the Eastern Bloc in the past 30 years or so, which has been great, but there's also difficulties in terms of integration. I think interoperability is the name of the game. It's the big motto that NATO keeps pushing forward, and it's the idea that we don't necessarily have to work directly together with the exact same type of equipment or the exact same type of tactics, but it's just about being able to work in parallel and have synchronicity in terms of the effects that we're looking to produce, be it on the battlefield or be it at the operational, strategic, or even political levels across the continent of Europe.
You have since transitioned to the reserve, so you've left the regular forces.
Correct.
Tell us about the differences between Reg Force and reserves.
Yeah, the regular force was really professional military career. So I was working that as like my 8 to 5 plus a little bit job with some weekends, I would say, or anytime we would go on deployment or exercises, right? The reserves, is more of a civil servant, but also a civic soldier almost aspect. So it's more one night a week where we're going in and doing some military training from about 7 to 10. And then 1 weekend a month, we'll go out and do some sort of an exercise, which is much more at the tactical level. So it's somebody who is able to hold like a full professional employment. So right now I'm working in defense industry as a business development manager, as an example. But then beyond that, I work as a reservist on Tuesday evening.
So some people work in the reserves full time.
This is correct.
Right? But some people work as a part-time thing, which is what you're doing.
This is correct.
And you're also doing, as you mentioned, working outside the forces completely but you're still in the military industry, if you will.
This is correct.
So what are you doing with the firm that you're with now?
Yeah, so I'm with Babcock Canada, and with them I'm just working specifically on business development and the land systems. So we're looking at different models that enable a build, support, train mentality where we can support the defense industry and the Canadian Armed Forces in terms of modernizing and working in those sustainment and maintenance systems.
Okay, so talk to me in a civilian way in terms of what is it that you're actually doing.
Yeah, so the Canadian Armed Forces owns very large fleets of vehicles and a lot of equipment, and we're looking to help specifically provide maintenance beyond those in uniform and support them in terms of just being able to modernize their fleets and maintain that equipment so they can focus on training soldiers and delivering the effects that Canada requires.
So basically, it's in one sense, it's being a mechanic for the military, but
Correct.
It's a very specialized
Correct.
field. So that's a business. So all kinds of businesses in that area are probably seeing a lot of growth these days, given the fact that Canada wants to rebuild their military.
Yes, the defense industry has definitely seen a little bit of a spotlight on it the past year when we talk about like the geopolitical affairs, but also the ramp up in NATO spending to hit 2% for Canada within the next year. It's interesting times. Of course, it's very busy and there's a lot of pressure on defense industry as well as the military, but I think relatively it's been handled well, and society is becoming more open to the idea of needing to spend for the military to protect our sovereignty and really assume ourselves as a middle power, as the Prime Minister is saying.
Do you still feel a strong connection to RMC?
I do, and that's, I would say, partially due to my engagement since I've graduated, working with, at first, the Royal Military College Club of Canada, and now the Royal Military College Alumni Association, which occurred with the merger of the foundation back in 2019. So from 2021. So 2019 to 2021, I sat on the club board, and it was mostly about delivering effects and supporting with affinity programs for alumni, be it ex-cadets at the time. Now with the Alumni Association, we've opened ourselves up really to all alumni of anybody who would have had tangential work with RMC, be it in the Red Coat program, or be it as a graduate of the Master of Defense Studies through the Canadian Forces College, or any of the other tangential institutions or aspects. And that's been a big part of my life because the institution formed me in my formative years, and I really believe in volunteering and in giving back to the institution in the long term.
When you talk about tangential organizations, give me an example of something like that.
Yeah, the Canadian Defence Academy, of course, which is the overarching entity that really oversees professional military education for Canadian Armed Forces, or again, the Canadian Forces College in Toronto that delivers things like the Joint Command Staff Program for senior officers, or even the National Security Program for officers that are about to become general officers.
Okay, let's circle back to the college for a second. Go back to the early days of RMC. When the decision was made back in 1876 to establish RMC, why choose Kingston?
Ironically, it really had to do with Lake Ontario. So following the loss of Carleton Island to the Americans after the American Civil War, or correction, before the American Civil War, but following the loss of that, there was no access points specifically. And so the Provincial Marine at the time needed an area to put their dockyard. So they had a naval shipyard at this point where ships were being built and they were doing storage of ammunitions.
Institutions like RMC don't exist in a vacuum. And if we break the history down into three broad periods, what were the main challenges or priorities in each? And let's start with its founding through the First World War. What was RMC doing or focusing on then?
So the belief really prior to the First World War was about bringing professional military officers as opposed to just having kind of like the colonial aspect or like the part-timers. And
so these would be British officers that would be the officers, correct?
But it was also about making it more Canadian at that time as we were starting to assume ourselves following Confederation. And these were mostly officers focused as engineers because the belief was by having engineer dedicated members, they would also be able to help with infrastructure and building society. Ironically, a little bit what we're looking at doing now with big infrastructure projects and the defense industry strategy.
Okay. Between the two world wars,
Yeah, so during the First World War, RMC truncated their program time and was really about delivering officers that could go directly to the front. And then following that, during the Second World War, they looked to do the same thing. But in 1942, actually, they ceased operations. The college closed, and it became more of just direct tactical military training for officers and professional members going over directly to the war. So it wasn't until the 50s, really, where the program was reopened in terms of what we know it as today.
Yeah. And has there been a difference in the way it operates from the end of the war in 1945 to the present day?
I would say so. There's been an evolution, of course, in terms of what society, Canadian society specifically, has needed RMC to be. And this is in terms of delivering fit, informed, and just ethical leaders within the Canadian Armed Forces, specifically beyond just having military training, but also as bilingual members of society, having that undergraduate degree, and also the rigors of research and study within the art and science of operational military affairs.
You mentioned it a little while ago, but let's go back to it. You talked about the 4 pillars, and let's talk about what they are and why they are important.
So, of course, we have military training, which is the military aspects beyond what a regular university would have. We have the academic pillar, which is really achieving an undergraduate degree when you leave. And then tangential to that, we have athletics. So all officer cadets and naval cadets at the Royal Military College will partake in athletics in terms of duty weekends, some sort of sports. So, for example, when I was there, we played intramural sports twice a week with other cadets from different squadrons. And then there's the second language aspect, where the ideal is that all officer cadets graduating have achieved the BBB second language standard in the public service of Canada. So the ability to kind of have the oral comprehension and reading and writing aspects of what their second language might be it English or French, because of course there are cadets that arrive that are Francophone primarily.
Right. You're talking about the athletics for somebody who comes to RMC. So basically what you're telling me is that we want somebody who is an officer who is in good shape to go out and do whatever they have to do.
We need to be physically fit to be able to withstand the stressors of being in an operational environment, working much longer hours, and that becomes a primordial aspect of being able to stay awake for a long time, make decisions under stress, and have a fully functioning body that doesn't shut down necessarily when enduring these stressors in these types of environments.
But the very top typically would not be on the front line.
This is correct.
Yeah, so they would be.
I think it's an example of leading by example and wanting to portray what we're trying to demonstrate to Canadian society of what we are embodying as a professional military.
RMC originally emphasized science and engineering as part of the academic program. Is that still the case now?
I wouldn't say it's an emphasis on engineering, but now there are programs offered in terms of economics, business, and the arts, but also the very popular one of military strategic studies, which leads into what they've become prominent for at the master's level and the Master of Defense Studies, and even a PhD offered in war studies and international affairs. So the focus, I think, has shifted a little bit depending on the department you're in, and it's definitely become more generalized, but the engineering aspects are still very much there, and we have one of the leading engineering programs specifically for aeronautical engineering right now, which is popular for many of the pilots coming in.
When you talk about strategic studies, give me a civilian's explanation as to what you're talking about there.
It's like executive level training. So it's looking at campaign plans. So not one specific product line per sense in business.
For battle plans, usually.
Yeah, exactly. So we're talking about campaigns, looking at theaters of war, looking at how a whole idea of like what a strategy would be overarching for a nation or for an army would be, vice at a platoon, company, or even battalion level.
I'm curious to know, for years and years and years, the Canadian military did a lot of peacekeeping, which didn't necessarily involve a lot of combat. Now, with Afghanistan and some of the other campaigns that the Canadian forces have been involved with, has there been a difference in the way RMC educates their cadets given the peacekeeping versus the combat roles?
I very much think so. Specifically at the undergraduate level, there's a lot more emphasis on things like ethics as we're looking at culture change in the Canadian Armed Forces. We've seen this over the past many years, especially since the Somalia inquiry in the 90s. But as it comes to very specifically advanced warfare, current day modern warfare, things like drones and whatnot, there is a significant amount of research going on at the college in the Applied Military Studies Department, as well, of course, as I mentioned, in the Department of War Studies, where they look at the progression of warfare as an art and science overarching the actual technological advancements themselves.
So you mentioned drones, and this is something that I've been thinking about too, is that this is different. We have long-range missiles, and we have other kinds of weapons where there isn't the hand-to-hand sort of combat situation. So you did mention that the college is expanding its program to deal with those sorts of things. And unfortunately for us, watching our television, we get the example of how that looks now with the battle in Ukraine between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Where do you see that going long term with respect to the technology of war? Do you have a sense of that? I know I'm just asking for your personal opinion.
Yes, of course. I personally don't know where the technological aspects of warfare are going to go, but what I will say is I don't think we're able to predict like we might have been used to do in terms of technological advancements. So obviously artificial intelligence might be a hot topic to talk about as it comes to things like targeting and making decisions in terms of engagements. But the reality is, in the Ukraine war specifically right now, if you look at any of the three different fronts, they're all very different fronts. One of them is more based on trench warfare. Another is much more conventional maneuver warfare, whereas the third is going to be a lot more precision fires, drone usage, and technological advancements like we've talked about. So then when you look at places like Gaza and what's going on there, as well as various areas of Africa where there's still conflict zones, it's very different types of warfare. So I think the best is being able to stay abreast and not necessarily being generalized, but still being understanding of what the developments are, so that if we do get involved in any conflicts, be it from a peacekeeping perspective, be it from an actual intervention with NATO, we're able to adapt ourselves and tailor our response as quickly as possible, but as efficiently as possible.
Given the fact that RMC has been around for 150 years, give me the names of some notables who have graduated from the college.
There's some evident ones, such as astronauts like Jeremy Hansen, Mark Garneau, Chris Hadfield. Of course, many politicians and senators. So the Honorable Aaron O'Toole, of course, graduate from the Royal Military College. One that I personally like to bring up quite often is Senator Hartland Molson, actually. So previous owner of the Montreal Canadiens, of course, with the Molson breweries as well in Montreal. And actually, Jeff Molson does have a tangential relationship with the college as well, having done many events with CMR Saint-Jean over just south of Montreal as well. So Hartland Molson, that's the big alumni I like to bring up that people might not necessarily be aware of in terms of Canadian society and history.
There's Kevin O'Leary too, right?
Of course, not a graduate of RMC or an alumni necessarily, but did do one semester at CMR Saint-Jean. And if I remember the quote correctly, he does say that the best things he learned there, the only things really, was how to get up early in the day and make my bed really fast.
One of the points that I've heard mentioned when we talk about RMC graduates and the way that it's set up right now, and I'd just like to get your thoughts on it. The business of somebody going out and getting an undergrad degree at any other university and then coming for a couple of years of intensive military training. The concept of separating the two, so that I guess one of the advantages is that you get a flavor of different institutions that the individuals have taken their courses in. What's your thoughts on that?
These models, of course, some called the West Point model, some called the Sandhurst model, where it goes from a mix of direct military training only and then education. And RMC, of course, has had different approaches to it over the years. So back when my dad went through the college, there was an opportunity to live off in fourth year, take some classes at Queen's. When I was at RMC, I had some friends actually that took a course or two at Ottawa U and actually lived in Ottawa for a semester and were assistants to senators or members of parliament. Of course, there's cross-pollination with Queen's. For me, I think the important piece at the end is just that cadets coming off the campus from 4 years in the peninsula, it's just about having had exposure to civil society so they can integrate as best they can and come and be productive and effective members. So the biggest thing I did in fourth year when I was there was I looked to volunteer in town in Kingston, of course being from Kingston in some respects, and I played sports once a week in Kingston with the Kingston Social and Sports Club, if not mistaken. So this is the advice and recommendations I always give to current cadets and alumni, is looking to be as integrated as possible with your community beyond just the identity you have as a military officer.
And I guess you could become a little isolated if you didn't pursue any outside activity.
I would say so. That bridge is difficult to cross in the winter months when you're coming across the causeway.
All kinds of different events being planned for this anniversary year, and because we are recording this in February of the 150th anniversary year, there's clearly a lot to be proud of, both in the college's history and its ongoing role in shaping Canada's military. I want to thank you for your service and for your continued involvement with RMC, and best wishes for all the celebrations taking place this year.
Thank you very much, Dave. I really appreciate being here.
That was my conversation with Alexander Landry, recorded as the Royal Military College begins its 150th anniversary year. My thanks again to Alex for his time, his insight, and for his continued work supporting the college during this milestone year. As always, thank you for listening. If you enjoy this episode, please share it with a friend and consider rating and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. It helps others discover the show. This episode was recorded in February of 2026. I'll be back soon with another conversation.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to thekingstonianpodcast@gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian Podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.